Live. Good morning. Welcome to April's presentation of the Curriculum Committee. I have board members here with me, Dr. Black and Deborah Brooks. And we have special guests this month, Dr. Feeney, Dr. Bear, Mr. Director, and of course, Dr. Hines and Dr. Allen as well. Thank you for joining us. This is our discussion of graduation rates for 2023, and I will turn it over to Dr. Feeney.
Thank you. For today, we are going to be talking a little bit about high school graduation, some of the requirements, some of the added components you can get as a New York State graduate, and some of the work that already has been put in place at the high school level to help improve the graduation rates, which, as many of us know, has been is a district priority, part of the strategic plan. It's one of my goals. It's one of Dr. Bear's goals as well. No further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bear and Mr. Director.
Good morning, everyone. We're thrilled to be here to talk about the progress we've made so far at Schreiber and what we're looking ahead to. It's important to note the data we are presenting today would be related directly to Schreiber and not district data, which would include out-of-district placements. As Dr. Feeney said, we are really doing this as a part of the strategic plan and priorities and goals from this entire side of the table, and actually the board as well. So we're looking at what action steps we can take, looking at evidence that we can use, and always using an evaluation method to make sure that what we are doing as a school is actually making a difference in the goals and priorities and ultimately the graduation rate.
I think I would just echo what Dr. Bear is saying. I mean, it is an all hands in, everybody is involved in this process. So moving forward, these are the steps that we will be implementing.
And we are using subgroup data to make sure that the intervention strategies are appropriate and help to overcome some obstacles that would be faced by different subgroups and some inequities that we face as a school system. So notes on the data. When we look at the graduation rate, this is the percentage of students who are earning a local Regents or advanced Regents diploma within 4 years of starting ninth grade. This does include August of the graduation year as well. The cohort year is when the students enter ninth grade. So you'll see data if you look at a New York State report card, for example, that you're looking at the 2018 cohort, which is expected to graduate in the year of 2022, hopefully in June, but also will include August. We also have an advanced designation rate. So this would be the percentage of students who complete the additional requirements for an advanced designation, which I will go over. There are additional courses and Regents exams required.
I think just important to note that the 2018 cohort, those were our sophomores when COVID started, and our 2019 cohort, which is the graduation year 2023, those were our freshmen who were impacted by COVID the first year.
Here you can see what the graduation requirements are overall. So students engage in 4 credits of English, so that would be 1 credit for each year. Social studies is broken down by global history and geography for the first 2 years. Then we have US history. And junior year, participation in government and economics would be taken senior year. And science, different schools may have different orders, but ultimately you need 1 life and 1 physical science, and then the 3rd credit could be either life or physical. In mathematics, students need 3 credits. Traditionally, we're looking at Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, though we do have some students who may use a pre-algebra for one of those credits. For world language, we need 1 credit, and we'll talk about the difference when we get to an advanced Regents diploma. We also need 1 credit in the arts, so it could be in any one of the categories listed. PE, students are expected to participate in PE each semester, which ultimately ends up being a total of 2 credits because those at Schreiber High School would be a 2x6 course, so you receive a half credit each year. Students, as part of the New York State requirement, need to take a half credit of health. At Schreiber, we do have 2 health classes. One of them is in freshman year and really serves as a transition for students coming from middle school into Schreiber. And the health credit that happens in 11th through 12th grade is the state requirement. We also have a number of electives that students need to take in order to get to the magic number for graduation. However, they have more of a choice in which classes they would like to fulfill that. And we also do have a local requirement of a senior experience. And depending on which senior experience students choose, it might be related to an AP class if they're an AP student. Otherwise, we have a number of options that would range from family and consumer science, health. If students are interested in social studies, they can do it on the history side, film and literature. There are a wide variety of choices. Anything else you would add? I think you've covered it there. Here you see the Regents exam requirements. So for a Regents diploma, students need to take the English Language Arts exam, which happens in 11th grade. It's a 3-year cumulative exam. In social studies, students take the global history exam at the conclusion of their sophomore year and the U.S. History Regents exam in their junior year. Science, typically we have students who take a life science first. That would be the living environment Regents. In 9th grade, we do have students who may take an 8th grade earth science exam at Weber. They still need 1 life, 1 physical. And math, the first Regents that students take would be Algebra 1. And world language, students do take a FLAX A, but that is not part of a graduation requirement. We don't get to that until we have the FLAX B for an advanced designation. So if you look at the next column, you still need to take the exams that I had just mentioned. If you are looking for the advanced designation, you need an additional science exam. And traditionally with the 3 credits, students would end up taking 3 science courses that end in a Regents. Mathematics, we have Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. Traditionally, Algebra 2 would serve as the barrier to receive an advanced Regents diploma as one of their challenges, one of the obstacles to overcome. So I will talk about some of the intervention strategies we have in place. And for the advanced Regents diploma, students need to either complete a sequence in world language that results in passing the FLAX B exam, or a 5-unit sequence in the arts, and that does need to be on one side or the other. So one of the questions that we would receive would be, can you do a combination of visual art classes and music classes? It does need to be a sequence in one of those areas. And the last option that we have here is a CTE sequence that would lead to the sequence in lieu of a world language sequence.
Yeah, I think we've covered it with the Regents of credits.
In addition, there are a number of endorsements that students can earn. So if we have students who have an average of 90% or more on their Regents exams related to that diploma type. So if you are a Regents diploma, it would be the exams, the English, 2 social studies, math, and science. If you have an average of 90% or higher, you would get a with honors designation. And once you reach the advanced designation for the diploma status, you would need to have an average of 90% or higher on any of the exams related to the higher requirement. There's also an option to receive mastery in both mathematics and science as awarded by the state, and that requires that students take at least 3 exams in that area and score an 85 or higher. That one's not an average. An 85 is considered mastery, so all 3 scores need to be 85 or higher. COVID certainly threw a wrench into this because we had a number of years when exams were not offered. So if a student has taken 3 exams, they need to be 85 or higher. If a student has 2 exams and 1 exemption in that area, they need to be 85 or higher on the exams. If a student has only taken 1 exam and has 2 exemptions, the state has said that we use the end of year grade as the score in lieu of an exam. So they would need to receive an 85 or higher in the courses ending in an exam. And that's how we recalculate because of COVID. So as we come out of that, we'll return to the state's original requirements of 3 exams.
And just know that the state has not issued any new guidance for this year. We're moving forward with this.
In addition, meaning no more exemptions.
They have not made an announcement yet, so we're still using the same calculations for this year's graduates.
Correct. And for this year, as far as we know, ending in August of this year, students are still eligible for special appeals, which would be if a student passes the course and receives between a 50 and a 64 on the Regents exam, they can receive a special appeal with approval of the committee, which ends up being teachers in the school, the counselor, Ms. Director. I also sign, and then we submit it to the superintendent of schools for approval. So the next recognition that we have as part of graduation would be diploma seals. We are in progress of implementing the seal of biliteracy and the seal of civic readiness.
So we are now taking advantage of or offering our students a more richer experience with being able to have those endorsements on their diplomas that demonstrate the proficiency in the seal of biliteracy. So our students have the ability to achieve a high level of proficiency in English and one or more world languages. They will have to go through various steps in the process to completing that, and that will involve a team at the high school, faculty, counselors, and administrators. And the state basically sets the guidelines for a certain point system. So a rubric is already in place that we would follow along with every other district in the state in order for students to earn that endorsement. So in addition to completing their diploma requirements, they are earning 3 points as designated by that rubric and from the English criteria and 3 points from the world language criteria. That is for the seal of biliteracy.
And last year, almost 30% of high schools in the state offered the seal of biliteracy, and we are working towards implementing that as well.
And then the seal of civic readiness, which is also a planning in progress. So that indicates on the diploma, formal recognition that a student has achieved a high level of proficiency in civic knowledge and skills and mindset and civic experience. So this also really rounds out the student's experience at Schreiber. Again, similarly, they must achieve all requirements for a local or Regents diploma. And again, they have a rubric in place where students would have to earn a set number of points, 6 points on the civic knowledge side, and 2 points at least in civic participation. And in coming up with this and thinking through this really aligns nicely with so much of the great work that our students are doing. So this was really just a natural progression, and why not honor our students in such a way. So this just got started in the 2021-22 school year. And at this point now, 368 New York high schools are offering this to graduating seniors.
And now we'll transition to graduation rates. So if you had seen the Regents and AP data, you'll be familiar with this chart. So the first row of scores would be where Schreiber High School, again, this is Schreiber, not the district, had scored as compared to the county and the state. So if we look at 2018-19, the graduation rate started at 91% with an advanced designation rate of 68.9%. And you can see how that compares both at the state and county level. If we look through 2019-20 all the way up through 2021-22, we see that there has been an increase. This certainly helps to have the exemption for Regents exams and modifications that the state has had. If you look at the 21-22 scores, we also had the special appeals in place. So any student who scored between a 50 and 64 on a Regents exam and passed the class was eligible for that exemption. We did put that in place on behalf of our students, so they didn't need to ask or request specifically. If a student was eligible, we went through the process of making sure that everyone had equal access and filed the paperwork on their behalf. This, as I had said previously, continues through August of 23. Based on the work that we had done, and I'll get into detail on that in just a little bit, we anticipate that our 22-23 graduation rate will be at 97.5%. With coursework that has been completed. We are certainly have some students we are watching closely to make sure that they have the support that they need and accomplishing the work that they need to continue passing classes and certainly have all the requirements in place. Our advanced designation rate, which would be the higher level of requirements, so additional coursework and Regents exams, we anticipate that 72% of our students will receive that advanced designation for the diploma status.
I do want to point out, though, just to put this in perspective, so each percentage increase in the graduation rate really correlates to approximately four more students graduating. So that's not insignificant. You know, there are real kids behind these numbers, so the increase in the graduation rate, the reason why it's such a priority for so many people is these are students, and they represent real lives and real futures. And everyone knows that, but it's, when you're looking at all these numbers, it's always good to remind ourselves of that.
Let me wait 15 more seconds for people to look. Do you need to look?
I wouldn't mind asking a quick question. First, I mean, there's numbers that you should be proud of, because, you know, and I think about it that way. I think about, like, what's the number of kids that is not graduating, and now what's the number of kids that's not graduating? It looks like you cut it down from something like 18 to like a few, you know, just a handful. So that's wonderful. The question I have is actually on 2018 to 2019, we're at 91%. Does anybody have historic knowledge to understand, like, that is a very low number? And that's before all of your times, but I just want to get a sense of, like, why that number, like, 95 is sort of what I would be expecting. I would have expected that in 2018, 2019. What happened? I don't know.
We're not sure of that. That's part of our analysis in terms of looking back. We focus on the previous few years, but that's a low rate.
That's a very, that's shocking. I mean, like, you know, okay.
For what it's worth, 95 is a low rate. So.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I just want to say, this is something, when I first came here, I pointed out to the board, is that we should never be in the low 90s. We should be at least 95 or higher. And so I think to the board's credit, not as much as a focused attention for this year, but it's nice to see the climb getting to where we are. So I'm really thankful for what we've done. So.
I was just wondering if it had anything to do with the transition from the, to the Common Core Regents exams, or the way the Regents exam, because there was a cohort that had to take 2 Regents exams every single year as it was being rolled out, and I don't know if this cohort was somehow caught up in that. I don't know the answer.
That was really, I mean, the English that was back in 2014, 15, the math rolled out. Yeah, I had a 2019 graduate, so,
So it wasn't that.
yeah.
But if you see, really, 18, 19, I mean, we were at the Nassau count there. And that's just honest.
Below the Nassau count. Yeah.
Below, sorry, yeah, 5.6, my goodness. Thanks.
Sorry, Captain Obvious here.
So, Dr. Rain, I agree, because I'm so excited to see this increase. But then we see the decrease in the advanced designation. Is there something that we don't understand about that?
When Lori and I had started looking at each individual transcript for our rising seniors, which would be our current seniors now, over the summer, we looked at the additional coursework that maybe had been taken, and now students were starting to take some Regents exams again. So looking at students who didn't pass Regents exams, or during COVID might have missed a sequence that if they were in school, they might have been able to fit in art sequence, but were hybrid during that time. So it's a combination of the coursework and the exams. This is something we've been working with the counselors to take a look when students are requesting courses for the following year, to see if there are opportunities to get to that Algebra 2 Regents, because traditionally that is the barrier in many schools, less so in the data that we've reviewed this year. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that. Really looking at if students are fulfilling that world language requirement, and if they aren't, what sequences can we really encourage kids to follow through. So that is our focus right now, is looking at those sequences. I think if we do that and have the counselors aware of that from the very beginning, we'll start to see that number rise again.
And I would also just add that for those students who potentially, you know, again, I mentioned that these were our freshmen, so really they were, as Dr. Bayer just mentioned, they were taking Regents exams for the very first time. In addition to, now that we have the possibility for some students to earn a CTE credential, that could be used as a pathway for an advanced Regents designation. So we have more opportunities now for our students.
You know, a lot of the determination of that advanced designation rate in many ways is, you know, once you're finished with junior year, you sort of know whether or not not many kids are earning that based on senior year stuff. Sometimes there are, they're, pursuing and the advanced work, but so much of that number was probably set before any of us arrived here.
And before the CT, because
Yes.
we're only in for a year. We need more time.
So if I can ask one more question, and maybe you're getting to this, but like, my question is, this is great, what did you do? Like, you clearly you did something to make this happen, so I'm just looking to hear qualitatively what's going on.
Slang 83, or is it?
There are that many slides.
Okay, all right,
But it is on.
okay, all right, good. I look forward to hearing that.
So if we look at our 2019 cohort, these are the anticipated class of 2023 graduates. We're looking at students who we are expecting to receive an honors endorsement. That would be 133 of our 406 graduates, and that's at 33%. Mastery in mathematics, that means they scored at 85% or higher on at least 3, or with the exemptions, we went over those rules, that would be at 29% of our class of 2023, and mastery in science would be at 32% of our students. If we go back to our 2018 cohort, these are the class of 2022 students. We really wanted to look at where students were and what happened, why they may not be in school anymore. So if we look at our students, 7 of the class of 2022 students are still enrolled. That would be 5 males, 2 females, and you can see some of the breakdowns in demographics. We have 5 of these students in a regular enrollment, 2 students who are in twilight enrollment. We are trying to monitor where students are in that progress and see whether they'll be eligible for graduation in June or in August. And while that wouldn't change our 4-year cohort graduation rate, we also look at 5-year, 6-year to make sure that we are encouraging our students to complete that work. We look at the 11 total dropouts. You can see the chart at the bottom when students dropped out. So this could be for a number of reasons. We have students who received 20-day letters, so they were absent for 20 consecutive days, unresponsive to reaching out and notifications that they would be dropped from the student information system and from enrollment in school if they did not return or get back to us. So that unfortunately does happen with students. We do have students who will come in and tell us that they are dropping out of school, and that could be for a number of reasons. We have students who go to employment. We have students who have very few credits, and even laying out what the trajectory would look like to graduate within 6 years. Students wouldn't be able to do a full day program. Now we do have Twilight, which will certainly help, but that will go back to the early interventions that you'll hear about as well. Anything else you'd like to add?
I think we're going to get to the slide or 2 as well.
If you, no, go ahead.
Are you getting to what's happening with these 7 students that are still enrolled? Is it looking like they're graduating in June or August?
We have about half of the students who are looking that they will graduate in June or August, with the others that we will continue interventions, whether that means they continue in a Twilight program or we look at another GED option.
I think we got to it a little bit later, but if we did not, I know we talked a great deal about those 7 students yesterday, and we had it broken down. So 2 of them we do expect will get their diplomas by the end of June, and it's based upon, one of them is based upon credits, one of them is based upon Regents exams. 2 of the students are non-graded students, so they can be with us until they're 21, so they will still be with us. The remaining students, we have an academic and an intervention plan for each one of them, so they're closely monitored by their counselor, a social worker, and the assistant principal.
Are some of these, on both of these lists, when you do the subgroups, I'm assuming that some of them cross, meaning, like,
The 7 still enrolled and the 11 dropouts are unduplicated.
no, I understand that, but when you're describing the Gen Ed, the Hispanic, the L, some of those are
Yes.
just crossing.
Yes. If you look at the next chart, you'll be able to see where there is some overlap. So I even have a note at the top. These are duplicated subgroup numbers. So if you look at the very first row, all students includes every single student. And then if you look at each subgroup, those would all contribute to that total of 11. Does this answer that question for you?
Yes.
So there were 428 students total who had ever been enrolled in the class. So when you look at the graduation rate with 410 students total, that discounts the 7 who are still enrolled and the 11 who dropped out. That's where you get to a total of 428. I included both female and male students because we do see that the advanced designation rate differs pretty significantly between the two subgroups, and that's something that we definitely want to take a look at. And even when we're talking about course selection, how can we encourage our male students to achieve an advanced designation rate more similar to our female students? You see that we also have a few other subgroups listed, and really I was looking at students who had dropped out or were still enrolled and how we can really best meet the needs of students. When we talk about our INVEST students who are eligible to remain in school until 21, we are thrilled to have the opportunity to make sure that we're really supporting our students and helping their transition once they do leave us at 21. And I'm sure Stephanie would talk about that at length if you had any questions about that. So we aren't looking to change what our INVEST students are doing. We just like to have an acknowledgement of where each one of these students are so that we understand what that number means if someone is still enrolled. Now, if we look at our 2019 cohort, these students are expected to graduate as the class of 2023. We do know that at this point, we have 5 students who have dropped out, and you again see the chart, 2 male students, 3 female students, and you can see where they left by grade level. We did have 1 student who dropped out in November of this year. Of the 5 students expected to be non-grads, we've looked really closely at what's missing. So we have, you see the limited credits accrued. We have single-digit numbers of credits that have been earned. So even if they were to remain in school through the rest of this year, they wouldn't be eligible to get to over 22 credits in this year. So these are students we will continue to work with, encourage to come to summer school, set up a plan for students to continue in a daytime and twilight program next year if they are able to. We do have some students who work and may not be able to do both programs, but our goal is to get as many credits recovered and help students get to the graduation finish line.
Let's get a quick question. So a bunch of these students don't have a great pathway to graduation, and that's part of why they're dropping out. Is the source of that if you look at their report cards and they have like a predominant number of Fs? Okay.
And I can also expand a bit. So many of those students, when we look at them, these are students that possibly have interrupted formal education coming to Shriver. So oftentimes we start working and providing interventions for students who, we really don't have much of a records or a history. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those interventions. That also plays a factor into the limited credits group.
And Lori said it really well this morning, that we're trying to really shift from being reactive and seeing what had happened to being proactive. And that really goes into the early warning indicators of there's someone who is going off track. How do we create those interventions in that support system while we can still help students achieve that credit recovery, get the passing grades that they need, get the support they need in order to pass Regents exams and have them as graduates. This is the chart you're going to be. We're really looking at a systemic approach. So the phrase of the year, I think, is from Dr. Feeney, is pockets of excellence. So while we do have pockets of excellence and we do have some really great ways that we're supporting students, we want a system-wide approach so that it's not about a student being lucky enough to have one person who does something. This is how we indicate who is at risk of not graduating, who needs additional support, how we develop interventions, and how we really take that team approach. It's even more important that once we have these things in place, that we're monitoring the data, because if a student is not responding to an intervention, we need to shift to a different intervention. And it's important to know that I'm not talking about special education. We may have an overlap of special education students, and then obviously we would work with Dr. Allen in our special education department. I'm talking about determining whether it's a compliance-based issue, a learning issue. And what do I mean by compliance-based? Sometimes it could be attendance, if a student is not attending school during the day or skipping a certain class, what do we need to do to make sure that a student is in class? Or we do have some wandering students at times who may go to class and then leave for 20 minutes at a time. So we look at, that compliance base, are they going, are they completing the work? Do we have enough data to look at whether or not they have a learning issue in the class or need some other intervention? Or are we just looking at the seat time? So when we do this at the school system, we also want to look at that district-wide approach. So we don't just want that to happen at Schreiber, we really want to partner with Weber as well. Because if a student has gone through our entire school system, then people know intervention strategies that have been successful, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time we get to a new school or a new grade level. So looking at how we can have that vertical alignment will really help to support students as well. Our data process. So you've heard a number of things that we've done over the course of this year already. In July, Lori and I modeled how we really want this diploma status overview to look. So we actually sat down together and went through every single transcript of our rising seniors to look at where they were, which diploma type we expect them to receive with honors, mastery in math and science, and if there was anything we could do. For example, we saw one student who had 4.5 credits in art, and if we had her sign up for an additional half credit of art, she would get the sequence and already have Algebra 2. So being able to really look through at the granular level, and as Dr. Feeney said, remember that each one of these percentages is about a group of students. It was nice to actually go through and look at what our students have done and how we can support them. So this is a system we're looking at having in place where the counselors and the assistant principals would also join into the process. So it gives really that team approach and the accountability for all of our students together. Really, in the summer, we were looking at the special appeals and region scores. So we've continued to do that in the fall and the spring to make sure that we have any student who's eligible for a special appeal, and also to look at areas where we do need to support students. So I'll get into specific supports in just another slide, but we were looking at, okay, so if a subgroup is performing below the proficiency level or below the special appeal level, how can we really target that support to make sure they're getting what they need? And this would be from all parties. So it would be actually Dr. Feeney and I, certainly Ms. Director. We had our chairs and directors involved as well, and the teachers also being able to go through their data and find out places where we can support students. Additionally, this year we put in the at-risk process, and for those of you who were in my interview process, I think this was probably the thing I talked the most about, was really looking at that quarterly analysis. So if we have those early warning indicators, which for me, in my past work and what I had brought here was 2 or more grades of a D or lower. So if anyone is really on that cusp, while D is still passing, we want to make sure that students are moving in an upward trajectory and not slipping down into a failing trajectory. We're also looking at significant grade decreases. So if somebody goes from an A to a C, that student needs some intervention from a counselor, from an assistant principal, from their teacher to find out what's going on. Are you suddenly having trouble? Is this indicative of something else happening that the student might need SEL support? We really want to make sure that we're meeting the whole child. And as I mentioned, attendance. So we certainly look at the 85% attendance rule that students need to be in class. And if we get students who are getting closer, we see a series of cuts, or if students are not in school for a number of days, really reaching out to the students and the families to see what's going on. So this is led by the assistant principals and the counselors, because they are almost like the case manager of the students and can reach out to teachers and share people as needed and really focus on that individual child and look at that whole picture instead of just an individual class.
I just want to add to this too. So with the onboarding of Synergy this year, this will provide us with an enhanced experience when it comes to reviewing this data. So I expect that when Katie and I begin our work or continue our work this summer, with the transition, we'll probably be doing those transcripts again, but we will have already had help from the counselors who have started this work for next year's graduates already. But the following summer, I expect that this will certainly be a much smoother and more enhanced experience as we look through the data.
And another important thing about those early warning indicators and at-risk process and the student information system, there's a tremendous amount of time and energy that goes into this, very well spent. However, if we can have machine learning doing some of that, then the time and energy is spent with students. And that would be why we want to maximize the efforts in that area as opposed to on spreadsheets with data. So here are some of the interventions. The top one is a brand new intervention that we started just after Thanksgiving. It was for our ENL students who were preparing to take the January 23 ELA Regents exam. We ran 22 sessions with 2 ENL teachers. Each session was 30 minutes each. The reason that we selected a before school model of 30 minutes is based on the students who we were targeting to attend get dropped off by the school bus at about 7:15, so that gave them time to get into the school building and meet with the teacher without having to worry about transportation to get to school or interfering with sports, a job, babysitting, anything else. Students were already in the building, so we picked a 30-minute model to maximize the amount of students who could attend. They went right up to the day before the Regents exam, so students were getting that contact time with ENL teachers. And I'm very proud to say that 9 out of our 13 students who attended sessions, even just one session, 9 out of 13 students met the minimum requirement for a special appeal or pass. We even had some students achieve mastery, which was incredible to look at the data. And if we talk about return on investment, that's really why it's important to track the data, because we were able to help students. So now for the 4 students who attended but had not passed, we are looking at an ENL ELA, Academic Intervention Service. I could say ENL ELA AIS. So that would be during the day, again, targeting our students who do need to pass in June. The data we're tracking includes the number of attempts made for passing the exam, the lowest score, the highest score earned if there were multiple attempts, the number of sessions attended, and the grade level. So certainly for our seniors, they are absolutely getting the maximum amount of attention because we need them to graduate, to pass or at least earn a special appeal in June in order to graduate. So having this during the day, again, students are already at school. We picked a time where the maximum amount of students are available to attend, and we will continue with outside of school support as well. This spring, we also added an after-school math program, which is consists of 17 sessions that are an hour each that happen before or after school. So these would require students to get transportation into school if they were not already here for a 7:15 bus. We do have 3 math teachers who are involved, and it's really meant to target those small group instructional models, not special education, general education, where students do need a little bit more support. Math is different than some other of our content areas because it is heavily spiral. So if students lost out on some of those foundational skills, as Lori had said, our 2019 cohort came to Schreiber and lost about a third of the year to COVID, and then had hybrid and remote instruction for the next couple of years. So we're looking at students who do need to fill in some of the gaps in foundational skills. So this will help to do that. And the Algebra 2, again, is the barrier for many students for an advanced Regents diploma, so this will help achieve that. The last one is about the at-risk process that we had just talked about. So it's really selecting and implementing that intervention strategy and creating that team approach to address issues, monitor progress. We certainly like to incorporate student voice, especially at the high school, because our teenage students need to be a part of their own path and let us know what's working for them and what isn't, and absolutely build a support system. And that's, again, run by the grade level assistant principal and counselor and new this year.
Can I just have or ask if I missed it? The ENL, ELA, AIS.
It's hard to say.
Were you able to get all 4 students into that?
Yes, we were able to get these 4 students and some additional students who had not previously attended the before school sessions, so we'll be able to add them in as well. The additional interventions that we have that are ongoing from previous years would be the instructional support team, referred to as IST if you've heard that before. This is really about identifying those patterns of challenges or obstacles. And my favorite part is building on the success of the student. So it's not just about where are those deficits, it's what's going well and how do we build on that success, which may be in a content area or in a specific class with a certain teacher who may have some strategies. So we really look at those tier 1 strategies. And we're looking at implementing an intervention and again, monitoring to make sure that what we're doing is working or to make a change if something is not working. We also have academic intervention services, the AIS classes. So if a student does need curricular support, that happens during the school day. And this would be for English, social studies, and science. And you notice we do not have it in math because if you hear, for example, Algebra 1+, that actually includes the AIS with it. So those students are in math class for a 6x6 as opposed to a traditional Algebra 1 class that is a 4x6. And the last support strategy is one of the most important. So I would say that the community involvement, building relationships, and helping students advocate for themselves is the way that we show students how to do this in the future. I'm thrilled that we're able to offer a tremendous amount of support while they're in high school, but what happens when they leave high school? They need to be able to identify their own needs and start advocating for themselves and certainly build that network of support. So we look to create some of that foundation now and really build what students have here. So when they do leave us, whether to go to the workforce, armed services, college bound, whatever their next path is, they're taking those strategies with them. And having that support system at school helps them come into the building, helps them ask for help when they need it, and has just a checking point. So if you are having a bad day, or we do see that grades are slipping a little bit, someone has that connection with the students to say, hey, what's going on? I've noticed that there's been a change, how can we help?
Well, we've all noticed, and this is not just here, but all over the place, students lost so much over the last few years, and helping them rebuild those strategies and those good habits for success, we have to play an important role in helping students build that.
We do have a number of general education programs that help to support on-time graduation. The FLC, and we'll go into what all the acronyms are, STEPS, Twilight program, that's new this year, that's our after-school program, summer school, and BOCES CTE that you've heard a tremendous amount of. The FLC is the Freshman Learning Community, It provides 1 year only for students to transition from the middle school to the high school, and it gives students that smaller setting. These recommendations come from the high school and from the middle school, and they would come into the high school as part of the FLC with those check-in points. They have meetings with parents and the FLC faculty who are involved, and it's more of that team approach, that team setting, including the social worker and counselor.
Sure. So our STEPS programs, STEPS is the Success Through Educational Alternatives, Personal Initiative, and Social Support. And again, we rely on those recommendations coming up to us through articulation from Weber. And that is also a collaborative effort from the counselor, social worker, assistant principal, and principal. So those students are identified for our STEPS program. It is a declining model course-wise. So in other words, in grade 9, students take part or they participate in 4 STEPS classes where they travel through as a cohort. In 10th grade, it is 3 courses. Grade 11, it is 2 courses. So in that program, there are teacher assistants, there are weekly push-ins from counselors and social workers. So there's a good deal of academic and social support embedded into the program. There is a consideration to expand this to include additional coursework in science because it is so needed, and ELA that is for sophomores, and ELA for seniors. So having this program extend 1 more year to that pivotal ELA class in senior year. And again, parents are also invited in for team meetings with the STEPS faculty to help that partnership outside of school. And our Twilight program. So the Twilight program, which is new this year, as you know, that's also designed to support students who may not be successful in the traditional daytime program. However, the design of the program allows for flexibility where students can participate in the, some of the day classes at Schreiber and also attend Twilight in the evening. And that allows for a broader range of coursework and electives that we do have during the day. There is also, similarly to what we just said with Stepson and FLC, we have a full-time counselor and social workers that overlap on certain days. So there is that social emotional support that goes along with the academic support. Each student that is recommended for Twilight from the high school, there is a comprehensive meeting that takes place, so reviewed by the assistant principal, by the coordinator of Twilight, along with the counselor, and if the social worker is working with that student. And each student must come into Twilight with a plan. So an academic plan is developed. So we've mapped out and we know what is the expected graduation timeline for this student. Parents, in addition, take part in an intake meeting with the student, because as Dr. Baer has been saying, we rely on our students to create and design their plans for graduation. This must be relevant to them, and they must have a voice in telling us what they need. This program rapidly grew to 35 students. We currently have 11 students from the class of 2023. There are 14 students doing credit recovery, and there are 12 Twilight-only students. And this could be for various reasons. Again, they benefit from a smaller academic setting. This has helped us tremendously. We've had some students who, really were struggling with attendance. They just were feeling disengaged. They're coming each day to Twilight. We also have, perhaps we've had some students who need to work during the day. They're able to get their credits at night. So as we have here later on the slide, when we talk about some students are starting a bit later in the day, maybe coming in for period 5 or 6, which is about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're staying for the extended day to 6:30 at night. 15 students have a full daytime schedule in addition to Twilight, and it is staffed by Port Washington faculty and staff. And again, I think Dr. Feeney talked in the beginning about really looking through these numbers to the human side. And I have to bring up one of our students who happens to be in the 2018 cohort, however, is so motivated and wants to graduate. He is here by first period, 8 o'clock every morning. He does an entire full day at Schreiber and an entire full day at Twilight in order to be able to graduate by June. And he is on track for graduation, so that's the human side of these numbers.
Can I ask a quick question about this program? First, the enrollment in the program is far higher than I expected, which is great news. I thought we'd have enrollment of a handful, less than 10, so that's great news. I'd love to hear a little bit about what it actually looks like, because every student needs a different set of courses, and so how do you tailor it? These small classrooms to one student that needs 2 ELA classes and another student that needs life sciences.
It's an excellent question. We have the ability with certain subjects. So in English, we have a senior and a junior. We might be able to provide instruction to that junior and senior. In some cases, that works. In some cases, it doesn't work. So with science, we really can't combine 2 disciplines in science.
But that's where having one life, one physical, so you
Correct.
look at what the student has and what they need. And even if it's out of order for science, we can navigate that with which science will fulfill the requirement.
And again, this is where the flexibility of the program helps so much, because if the student is able to come to a later in the day class at Schreiber and fulfill something, if they need a particular elective, or we have students that love our auto tech program, so they come for that during the day, but then fulfill their core requirements where they struggle at Schreiber during the day. So that is one way, but we really do design, Twilight, the design of Twilight is informed by the credits needed by the students. So it's so incredibly personalized, and we can make changes as needed to that. and our BOCES CTE, our Career and Technical Education, and thanks to, of course, the support of the superintendent and Board of Education for allowing this program to be here in Fort Washington again. So the enrollment increased. Last year was our first year with our 10 juniors who are now seniors at this point. And this really, we've noticed that this was really the motivator that was needed so greatly for some of our general education students that were at risk or disengaged for various reasons. And those students are set to graduate this year. Our enrollment in CTE was increased again this year because we have a new group of 10 Gen Ed students who will be attending BOCES as juniors next year for their 2-year programs. So we are really excited. By next year, this program will increase to 40 students. And they will be 20 juniors, 20 seniors, and divided evenly between special education and general education students. So not only does this provide them with the career pathways for some of these students, because every student must have a plan, this also can potentially provide them with a pathway either to a Regents or an advanced Regents diploma. So the benefits are clearly, Dr. Bear was speaking a moment ago about return on investment. This very clearly adds to that. BOCES does offer over 35 CTE programs, and these are either in the AM or in the PM at Valley Tech or GC Tech. Students are at Schreiber for their core coursework for the remaining half day. Embedded in CTE, so there's work-based learning experiences. They have opportunities for internships, co-ops, and clinical rotations. And students, we just talked about this, so students who complete the approved 2-year program may be eligible for a 4+1 pathway, should they need that. They will get that CTE endorsement, but they could use it as a pathway. And one note on the BOCES offerings, so this also has spiraled down our Weber counselors who have already some students that have identified, and even if it's just a handful, they're interested in this, they're able to start those conversations in the 8th grade. And some of the Weber counseling staff did attend the BOCES open house this year so that they could come back and talk to their parents. So we're starting to have those conversations a bit earlier for those students who are thinking about some hands-on programs.
Are we finding, I know it's very early, but I guess similar to our students when they go to college and they change their majors 20 times? Are we finding that the kids are happy with the program they're in? Are they looking for change? Is it not meeting what their expectations were, or has it been smooth sailing?
So anecdotally, they're very excited about the programs, because we are really looking at the number of students that we're sending there, and we go through a process, because we have to, the funnel is pretty wide when we first put out the interest survey to students. So those 10 students are really interested in the careers or in the learning that they are selecting, but that is data that we will be collecting moving forward. So with this group of students, those are going to be part of our senior exit conversations with the students. How well do you see this helping you? We will be able to keep an idea on the data. What are they doing to continue that learning, or are they getting an entry-level job? Are they going to a trade school based on this? So this is important data for us to look at.
So that's another question I have is some of these course trajectories are not that they will be done as seniors, graduating seniors, right?
Some of them, and some of them could use this even as a springboard to go to college. Some of the pre-nursing programs that they have at BOCES are an incredible way for students to get some advanced learning before entering into a nursing program, which they are becoming more and more competitive each year to get into a nursing school or a nursing program within a college. So this information, BOCES does give them about a year or two in a learning experience, whether it's at a college or in a trade school. So they are getting the benefit of being eligible for certain jobs and careers. So it gives them the head start.
So if there's a family that has an expectation that, oh my goodness, just please, let's just get that high school diploma. If it's a financial need in terms of contributing to the family, or are we preparing for particular families that this program, they need to be done at graduation and move on to a career rather than more training or.
It depends on the field, so there are a couple things. I want to circle back to your first question with students wanting to change programs. The Taste of Tech helps tremendously, so students are actually going to the classroom and hearing from students who are already enrolled in the program and actually seeing what some of the work is. My very first countywide principals meeting was actually at Berry Tech, and they walked us around, and every single room that I went into, I spoke with the students about, tell me why you joined this program, what's your favorite part about being here, and a lot of it was that setting, they were interested in the topic, and then they travel as a cohort, so if you are in the junior year program and it's a 2-year program, you're with that same group of kids the following year, so that helps to connect them to stay in the same program. When you look at the career training that students receive, for veterinary, students don't get the total number of hours they would need to leave and just go and be a vet tech right away, but it tremendously cuts down what they would need to do once they leave school. So it really depends on the program that they're going into. Cosmetology, they receive the number of hours that they need and they can take the test. So when they leave, they are ready to go and work in a hair salon or the nail salon, they receive that cosmetology certificate. So it really just depends on the program they're interested in and what they are studying.
So, but are students aware of those kinds of barriers or lack of barriers come
Yes,
graduation?
yes.
That's what I was gonna say.
They actually find out about that information as they're signing up, because BOCES wants to make sure that when you're coming into the program, you're not thinking, I'm doing the 2-year vet tech program and I'm ready to graduate and I'm done.
That's my concern.
Yes. BOCES does a really good job preparing the students for the reality of their program. So in addition to, there are counselors there at BOCES, administrators, but the teachers there are professionals in the field. So they will speak very clearly to what those requirements are. I also just wanted to mention that Taste of Tech, which is an incredible program for students to attend. That was back in person for the first time this year. So last year, our students that participated in CTE as this year's juniors, they had a virtual Taste of Tech experience, which was good, but definitely not the same as being in person.
If I can just add, and thank you for expanding on a lot of this. Many of them, depending on the field, they come out certified, which I think is what we're concerned about. One of the things we're really looking to explore at some point is what can we bring back to Schreiber instead of sending our students to BOCES. And one of the courses is barbering. It's something we're really looking at and investigating right now as far as space within Schreiber and what that entails as far as with the teacher and all that good stuff. And that's a very, very popular pathway to move to.
For our students.
For our students.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I will speak a bit about our school counselors and our school counseling department. So our college and career information, and of course, graduation, and the importance of taking rigorous courses that lead to, we always start with bar is high for advanced Regents diplomas, and then for those where a Regents diploma is more appropriate, they are delivering this information to all students as a Tier 1 intervention. This year, in increasing our college and secondary education knowledge, the council's incorporated various interest and learning style inventories into their work with freshmen. In addition, on the social emotional learning piece, these lessons were designed to help acclimate our freshmen to Schreiber. So with the return of freshman groups and freshman lessons, the councils were able to also deliver the New York State Learning Standards for Career Development, which in 9th grade is basically learning who am I. So students got a good exposure to what that is. That's also helped the counselors in helping students plan their courses for next year, because all of that information lives with them in Naviance. So if students are struggling with deciding on an elective, we can go back to those learning inventories and the career inventories, hey, I see that you are, you're inquisitive, maybe think about something where, maybe take a science elective, or maybe take a tech elective, or whatever would be appropriate for that student. So we were able to capitalize on that. Our ELs and our students with disabilities do receive more personalized attention. So with each one of our initiatives that the counselors do, they will tailor that more to a learning experience that is more aligned to their needs. So we have a counselor who is working very closely with our Miles students in special ed, and those are our self-contained students. So coming in and doing those lessons with them, also working with our Invest population and the wonderful teachers in that program, in how those learning experiences can be tailored for them. Our English language learners also experience multiple opportunities where our school counseling program is scaffolded to areas not only in bilingual, but what types of things would satisfy their needs. So we might do a bit more hands-on, assisting with some certain applications, assisting with other some of our scholarships, taking them to see school colleges in the area, so bringing them on local school tours. Three of our counselors, prepared an experience for them this year, where they spent a day on a local college campus, ate lunch like a college student. These are experiences that they had not had before, and for various reasons, may or may not have that ability in their families. So the counselors provided with those experiences. And again, we spoke a few times this year about the Choose Your Future Fair, which at that fair, there were career, college, trade school, union opportunities. So a little bit of something for everybody to help students identify a pathway beyond high school.
And so many community connections. So when you look at the people who were at the table speaking with students, I actually had one of our juniors walk up to me and go, "Oh, I know him from." And so I think the important part about the Choose Your Future Fair, about taking these trips to local colleges, is helping students see themselves in that future. And it's not that we are deciding for them or telling them where they should go, it's that we're opening up doors to possibilities that they can consider themselves, and we are just maximizing their potential and clearing the path for them to get there.
So I want to include, speaking of what you're talking about with possibilities, and Dr. Baer included a quote, but one of the obstacles keeping students from pursuing college or other forms of higher education is the lack of access to information or seeing future goals as possible. And we take that very seriously, because we must be the providers of those possibilities and those goals, and linking goals to their current realities to help our students be engaged and know what those goals can be beyond graduation. And we talked a few minutes ago about the instructional study team for students, and the counselors do play a critical role in evaluating the students' strengths and areas of improvement, but especially those strengths in helping students develop their personalized intervention plan. The counselors and the assistant principal we need to know what a student's strengths are. So again, those interest and learning styles inventories will help us create those plans for students.
It's an asset-based model versus a deficit-based.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes. And again, that proactive versus reactive.
So just to summarize and give some final thoughts, we are making progress toward improving the graduation rate and really looking at our students as individuals who receive the support that they need. It's really these early identification and interventions of the early warning indicators to make sure that we are addressing the needs of our struggling students and looking at that comprehensive data of our subgroups to address inequalities that may exist. Collaboration is a huge part of what we've been working on, whether you're talking about among classroom teachers, with administrators, with our PPS department. We're really trying to leverage those strengths from each person to meet the needs of our students and to promote horizontal alignment, meaning that all ninth graders are getting a similar enough experience where we can implement the targeted support as necessary, and really trying to identify how we can have large-scale improvement for the biggest return on investment. As we are shifting to next generation learning standards and revising curriculum based on the new courses, for example, our English 10 honors, we're engaging in professional development to make sure that we are aligned and within the classrooms, we're meeting the standards and we're preparing students for these exit exams. As we have said in our data overview, it's not just about the numbers, but the data really does tell a story. So if there are opportunities to better support students, that's the evidence that we're using. We really are conducting that ongoing curricular review so that we are aligning with the standards. And this is a great opportunity to do it when the standards are changing, when exams are changing. And as Lori had said, with our new Synergy student information system, trying to have the program do as much of the heavy lift as possible means that our PPS, our administrators, our teachers can really focus on the students and receive the information that is generated through our at-risk system that we're developing.
Wow, is that the end? No.
We have to have the portrait of a graduate. We're looking for that consistent approach to make sure we're addressing all needs and shifting from that pocket of excellence to a systemic approach. And that growth is really through collaboration to address the portrait of a graduate and these medallions that we're so focused on and maximize the potential of every single student. Education is the way to move mountains, to build bridges, to change the world overnight. And this is what we hope to have in June. No rain.
Oh, man. You weren't here for the rain, you got out of it.
I was at a prom.
Oh, it was wild. Thank you. Wow. I'm happy to pass it on.
I waited, so this is just how I felt today. So one of the first things that popped out at me is that it's very possible in my mind. First of all, thank you for this very wonderful presentation. I know it took a lot of data and research and coordination. I appreciate that the children and students that we are helping to get across the finish line, especially as relates to Twilight and BOCES, they actually come out of high school with a greater focus on what they want to do in life than the kids who are going to college. So I'm just thinking that they're already on a path that I think is, they've expressed a passion and they've been able to find some of that within either Twilight or the, well, Twilight is more academic, but certainly within BOCES that's just my initial thought, rather than going through 4 years to be, okay, well, what will my major be in? Is it really what I want to do in life? And so to me, it's not only about improving the graduation rate, but giving students a path beyond high school that actually sets them more immediately into something that they may find their passion in. And they may change later in life. I have no way of knowing, but just at the outset. My initial thought. So at the beginning, you said these were graduation rates only for Schreiber, but not for out of district. Is there a reason that you chose not to include out of district?
She's the high school principal, right? This was primarily.
So not in charge of.
Right, and the larger presentation on district-wide. It's a lot more that's not necessarily in our control, perhaps could necessitate a little more monitoring on our part so that with all those other placements, and I know in Dr. Allen's department, a lot of what they do, they reach out and see, they follow up. But this was, this is not in Dr. Bear's purview right now.
understand. So when we look at graduation rates, or when the state looks at graduation rates, is it for Schreiber then?
It's both.
It is both.
So when you go to the state website, the data site, you can get the graduation rate for the district. You can get the graduation rate for the high school. So if you were to go to Great Neck, it has 3 graduation rates for each of the high schools as well as the district, which includes both high schools plus the out-of-district placements.
So the rates that are in the chart that you provided, those are Schreiber rates?
All these are.
These are Schreiber rates.
Specific to Schreiber. Okay.
Yes.
So I see it says Schreiber, but I just wanted to, okay. So on slide number 2, when you're looking at the action steps, and you're identifying the courses and program structures, what about the outside factors? Because it seems to me throughout the slides there were students who, for example, dropped out because they had work obligations, family obligations. So in the action steps, is any of that taken into account?
That really goes into the community involvement, so when we look at that support system for the student and the wide variety of alternative options that we have now that we have Twilight. So that could look into, okay, so if you need to work, what are the hours you're working? Is a daytime program better for you? Is an evening program better for you? And having multiple pathways for students to hopefully keep them in school. If a student really has no interest in completing their high school graduation, the requirements for graduation, unfortunately, we can't always keep them in school, but that's where the early warning indicators come in. So that instead of you're missing 15 credits for graduation, it turns into, okay, let's keep you on track from the beginning. Then as we maybe truncate a school day to accommodate the outside factors, we'd be able to keep them in school.
I understand. I actually have more questions about Twilight, but I'm going to stick to the slide deck so I don't miss anything else. So with attendance and discipline data, also looking at the action steps, do those seem to coincide?
Sometimes,
But not always.
not always. If you look at the discipline data, there are times when a student may have a disciplinary record, but goes to classes and is really attending. So you're talking about maybe some of the free times, and we help to find better and more productive ways to spend those free times. Or you may have a student who is exhibiting school avoidant behavior, so you would have the attendance issue. However, there's no discipline issue involved. That might be a student who needs that smaller setting, and that's where Twilight also comes into play as well. So there is some overlap, but not always.
So in the national news, we've heard that schools have lost track of kids because of COVID. Because when schools went virtual and nobody was in school, and then some kids didn't come back. Have we had that here? Do we know? Have we lost any kids during COVID, or we've gotten everybody back into school who should be back in the building?
Everybody that should be back in the building is back in the building.
Yeah, I was just trying to, you mean students who were at home being taught virtually, did they all come back?
Yes.
Did-
Yes, because in some schools, even in New York State, in the news, there's been reported that the schools have lost track of the kids, but that's not the case.
We haven't lost track of that.
Great. I don't know if that question.
There are some students who may have exceeded the 20 days of not returning to school, or may have returned to a home country if they had come here previously. But we are aware of the students, so it's not that somebody just fell off the map and we don't know what happened to them. We do have data.
And we've had some students with school phobia where, again, Twilight helps with that because of the small class size design.
Do we know why Algebra 2 is closing out?
That is statewide, it's not just, in Port Washington, it's not just Stryker, that traditionally is for any high school, the most significant barrier.
On the biliteracy and civic readiness seals, I know you're new here, and I know that there's been a lot of change in the guidance department, but do we know why Stryker didn't do this, or why the district didn't do this when it first came out, or is that just, we're all new here, it doesn't really matter what the reason was, we're doing it now?
We realized we weren't doing it, so.
Those should be in place for next year.
They will be in place for next year.
We are in progress on both.
So this year's graduation class, where we had the 97.5% graduation rate anticipated, did they have to take the English ELA exam last year, or was there an exception
Yes,
last year?
they had to take
So
ELA.
this includes then the fact that, because that's usually a barrier for a lot of, especially the ELLs, so this includes that.
And that's where that, when we talk about interventions, that ELL course that we're in the ENL course that ran for our students in the fall was really helpful in the morning.
That's awesome, yeah.
Push a few more kids over that hump.
So I was wondering, so that's awesome then, because that had traditionally been one of the reasons that our kids, either who hadn't mastered English because they had come to this country at a much older age, or they were students with interrupted formal education, couldn't get over that that ELA Regents Hub.
Remember that we still have special appeals, so
Yes.
the bar right now is 50 to 64, and that goes through August, which is why we are pushing so heavily on the additional support, because now if you're going from a score of 44 to 50 is not as overwhelming as a 44 to a 65. So we're really looking to capture as many students as we can before August.
Which is different than the traditional superintendent's appeal.
Correct.
Yes, yes.
Okay, for the advanced designation rate, have you looked at the data? Is there any correlation between the number of students who have been on the AP accelerated coursework track and the advanced designation? Are there any students who are just at Regents level rather than accelerated math or AP math, whatever the accelerated courses are, that are getting the advanced designation rate? Am I making sense? So
No.
a student who maybe took algebra in ninth grade.
Yes,
Or,
yes.
or biology or earth science in 10th grade, weren't on the accelerated track.
Yes.
Are they
They're still
also
getting
achieving
advanced
advanced
designation.
designation?
They're just taking Algebra 2 as a junior.
The slide, this is not a page number, but it's one that says the 2018 cohort subgroups.
Yes.
So 39% of the English language learners are dropping out. That's the highest number there. Is that, what would you say are the main reasons that they're dropping out?
So those would be some of the barriers where you're looking at perhaps interrupted instruction and students who are coming in and trying to take courses, high school level courses in a different language than their native language are really struggling to get those credits. So that's where it goes into some of those early warning indicators and the additional strategies and supports, and that's where we're definitely focusing moving forward.
I was going to ask for the class of 2023, the students who dropped out, if you had the reasons, but the numbers here are so low that I don't know if that would violate anybody's privacy. So that was a question I was going to ask, and then I thought, well, maybe I won't, because there's so few here that I might actually give reasons that are private, so I'm not going to ask that question, but
We could go
It's
over
in my
that separately.
it's in my head, it's okay.
Doesn't that yellow box?
So limited credits that were accrued,
dropouts.
going and working.
Dropouts.
That's for the expected, I see.
Yes.
That's for the expected non-grads as opposed to
Right, you're
dropouts.
expecting to look at the dropouts on the left side.
So on slide 19, where you're going through the data process, and you're looking at the early warning indicators, and actually all of the different actions. Is this new this year,
Yes.
where Schreiber is coordinating with the counselors and the administrators to do this, so it was never really looked at before?
It was not looked at in this way prior to this year.
I think I asked this in a previous presentation, but I'll ask her, Dr. Kushner here, or even maybe, I don't know if Dr. Feeney knows. Is there a correlation between a risk of not passing a Regents exam versus the in-class performance? So in other words, are there students who are doing well in the classes? They're performing, they're learning, they're showing that they're mastering the subject, but they get to the Regents exam and for whatever reason, it's just complete.
I would say not mastering. So mastery, we look at 85 and higher for mastery. So this is where when we see a student struggling on assessments that I talk about the difference between compliance data. Are you completing the work that you need to versus the assessment data? So if we are seeing assessment scores that are low and not indicative of mastery or proficiency that they are demonstrating on classwork, homework, other assignments, that's where we would start to worry. So that really goes back to those early warning indicators. So if you have a student who's consistently performing poorly on an assessment, that's where you might expect them to perform poorly on a Regents exam. We would hope that our grades are reflective of what students really know, understand, and can demonstrate, and that would be on their Regents exam score as well.
If you're teaching to the standards, right, you're aware of them, you're teaching, you're designing your lessons around the standards, and that's how you're assessing students, you're gonna do fine on that assessment. In some cases, it might be a bad day, whatever it might be, but by and large, they will do fine. And that's, as long as you're monitoring that during the school year, they're gonna do okay.
So you're really finding the students who are not doing well in the classes? Yeah. On the EL and Regents Prep, how are the students selected or identified for these additional actions? Does it happen to be all ELLs, or is there a certain group, or is it the same where you're looking at the coursework throughout the year and others?
So the ELA exam is offered to juniors. So any ELA student who is listed as a junior and expected to take the Regents exam actually takes it early. So they have a first attempt in January.
The ENLs, all in the
The
ENLs.
ENL students. Mhm. So they get multiple attempts before waiting until, the stakes are really high their senior year. So that would be any junior takes it in January, was offered this opportunity to be in the additional support class. And any seniors, which would mean that they had multiple attempts already, if they had not yet passed or received the 50 for a special appeal, was offered the opportunity to be in this course as well.
Can I piggyback off of that? Is there an opportunity to analyze where that student has had difficulty if they've taken it multiple times?
Sure, that's an important part of what we can do with the instructional data warehouse, and that's on both seasons, and
That's why
that's
I
part of the, meetings that I'm prepared to have with all of the department supervisors to help them see which kind of reports can, showcase where the kids are succeeding and doing well, and where they need a little more support.
And that's where we really look at the gap report to see if there's a question, whether it's multiple choice or constructive response, where it's not parallel to the motion of whether we're looking at the school or the county, because we want to know why our students performed much lower or much higher. And then we can look at the long answer summary analysis to figure out, well, was there a distractor? Do our students have a misunderstanding if, say, 40% of our students selected the same and correct answer? And that goes back into leveraging the strengths and the expertise of the teachers in our school, because if someone is performing well in that area and someone is struggling, they can use each other as a resource. And it's not as if, that every teacher has the exact same pattern. You can go through and look at how that pattern changes. And we can drill down and see by student as well.
That's, so in terms of these vulnerable populations, we can really drill into where their gaps are as students.
And we like to look at patterns first. I think we've said it 15 times at this point, the return on investment. So every time we select something to focus on, we are deselecting something else, and we don't want that to turn into a deficit. So we're looking at where is that area where we can maximize how students will perform on this exam without taking away from something else. Did you have a question?
Yeah, we're getting close to time.
Sorry, Bob, I didn't ask the question during, so I said.
So the question I have is, one or two questions. The first is related to when we get the students. So I imagine there's a great variation as to when, in other words, some students come in kindergarten, right? And some of the students are coming in ninth grade, and so some of the students may be struggling in ninth grade. So I'd just love next year, I think this is a phenomenal report, and you guys have done an amazing job. Next year for the students who are just in the sort of borderline group, to see when it is we started retaining them. Because I think it's a very different conversation if we retain a student in 10th grade than if we have had them since elementary school. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is you created this great resource of students who are happy in these Twilight programs and other programs that are successful. And I would just ask that you leverage the good relationships that you built now to try to get them to come back to speak to other students later on, because I think seeing a 21-year-old that is successful, that graduated from this program and struggling at 16 will be really powerful for the 16-year-olds in 5 years.
Maybe like our knowledge panel that you ran.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes, I was wondering.
Yeah, I think
That might be something,
I think that would be great.
We'll talk.
I have,
And choose your future.
choose your future.
I don't have any questions. This is amazing, and a lot of my questions were asked. And I'm just very excited to see the growth and the real deep dive into understanding what our students need, and this is wonderful. Just a quick, now that we have so many supports and so many approaches, do we look, it's also new, right? So do we look at avenues where there's intersection, and so that we develop efficiencies, and efficiencies both in terms of the financial responsibility, but also catching these students, as you're describing, catching these students before we wind up in these very intense, students with intense need, if we're building better from, as you're describing, from K to 9, and catching this early.
Absolutely. So one of the great things about a systems approach and using data is that you can really continue to evaluate. So maybe something was a great intervention 10 years ago, but it's not a great intervention now, so that's not something that we need to continue with. However, we may find that something else is more effective. So absolutely streamlining, finding almost a menu of interventions that would be appropriate and cost-effective for the district, and getting our students really involved and back in. I think it just keeps going back to those early warning indicators, because if we catch them early, it's not the emergency situation, just as you had said.
And I think too, we're looking at things differently in our, if it's a post-COVID world or wherever we're at. And I think you had asked before about, well, were these interventions done? Well, now that we have, Katie's here with Katie's vision and with the new administration at the high school, coupled with our new vision with, as the counselors, or with me being here for, it's 2 years tomorrow, so kind of aligning those visions and now moving forward. So on some levels, certain things that were happening, now it's a whole new approach with a new system, and with looking at those overlaps to ensure, what aligns, what makes sense, and what needs to be rethinking so much as we emerge from the pandemic.
Any others? Community, have any questions? George?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Julie.
So I appreciate all this, thank you. I actually, while we're doing this presentation, also pulled up your November presentation, which equally mirrors it, but from the system-wide approach from the K to 9, and looking at the curricular aspects, the regions aspects, and the data mining that you're looking to utilize the warehouses for, and trying to marry that with this presentation. So I appreciate the alignment of it. And I would love to see now Dr. Allen's presentation of the special ed right there, because I do think it's a subgroup that unfortunately the numbers are not as beautiful. And this all plays into our overall graduation rate perspective and what we're trying to accomplish. So that's just my first overall observation. I also recognize and appreciate the newness of your positions, and the fact that both Dr. Feeney and Dr. Barrett and Lori Director have come in and you've created interventions, you've analyzed this, and you've put this forward. I'm going to, though, say a not nice thing maybe. The reality of life is these graduation numbers are incredibly high because we had COVID and we had no regions, and we still are existing under a special appeal, right? And these things have made it advantageous for our students, which if we look at New York State Ed, they're discussing the value of regions and other things. And maybe as a school district and advocacy effort, we should be showing is this data to say that we are taking barriers down. We're incorporating interventions because we realize we're not stopping just because our numbers are 95 and 97. But we can't just, we can't do it all, right? We have to do interventions and also some help. And so it might behoove us as a district, as a board, to look at really that advocacy against regions, or a change in regions, or a change in the special appeal process if we're seeing it's working. Because what I'm seeing here, and I don't know, are you seeing that that's what helped? Is that what you're seeing helped breeding success to these students is that combination of the interventions and the fact that they at least have a special appeal. right?
Absolutely. So being able to apply the exemptions for students and have that floor be 50 for where we can pass, we are absolutely seeing that. I do think that it's, important to note that as we are coming to August and the end of the special appeal at 50, we will certainly need to use those early warning indicators.
Right.
So knowing which students need help, making sure that we're supporting our kids, I think that we will have to double our efforts.
Well, and so then again, next year, this conversation is even more important once we start looking, and even actually 2 years from now, right? Looking at when we don't have a special appeal in place, how successful these interventions are, what more budgetary needs you're going to need, because these are all costing money, right? And as these programs
Some of
are
them.
growing, some of them, great. And then as they grow, right, as we have more interest, we're going to potentially need to expand them and have that capability.
And one important thing to note as well is the fact that when we do have Regents exams and we do have statewide standards that we're following, it really does anchor what each classroom is learning with each different teacher, because everybody has that same exit exam. So it's not that we're teaching to the test, it just creates that structure where students are learning similar things. And that's incredibly important when we're talking about going from year to year and which students you've received, you know that they learned this set of information.
And that's what your November presentation also said, so thank you for continuing that messaging.
At least I'm consistent.
You were very consistent throughout, so excellent. That's really my question, I guess, or statement.
So I think I'll just add to that. So when I'm looking at it from a pre-K through 12 lens also, so these will be part of the larger conversation. So obviously, I'm going to be looking through one particular lens, but the principals and myself and Dr. Allen and perhaps Ms. Rate and others at the table, looking at that and really identifying as it spirals up, what are the needs that we're seeing to answer some of those questions and inform our interventions moving forward.
Yeah, the Regents is a Blue Ribbon Commission, as we know, so they're
Yes.
reevaluating everything.
100%.
But I want to go back to slide 2 and then question.
Thank you.
For the first time ever, this is a priority for the district. And that's why this is going to work. So in as much as, yes, there are certain exemptions here and there, for the first time, we're actually really focusing on it from all different levels and different layers. I think that's what's going to make it successful.
Right, and to Dr. Hines' point, and, I don't want, I agree, the exemptions certainly help, but they've also been in place for the last few years. And in fact, more so, kids weren't even taking these exams and were getting credit. At least now they take them, you have to get at least that minimum score. But to Dr. Bear's credit, getting your eyes on every one of these students and really being able to say, hey, in July, this is the work that started July 1st, literally. This one, and oh my goodness, this one doesn't have this class schedule, we need to make sure. These are the details that make a huge difference.
100%. They work together.
Yeah.
You cannot have one without the other.
Correct.
And the interventions, I think, have a stronger perspective. Please do not mistake my words. Okay. I just want to be realistic about numbers, because sometimes we
Absolutely.
stop looking at numbers and we're like, oh, look at us,
Exactly.
97, hot dog,
With
we have no
that,
problems.
Do you have any indication that either one of us are like that?
No, I don't. I just like to say that loud.
No, I sleep with this thing.
We're good, okay. I'll check it next year.
Yeah, well, data has always shown that the ninth grade is the most important year. As a matter of fact, there is the landmark Johns Hopkins study on the graduation rates. And they identified a whole bunch of variables, but they said number one, attendance. And they said they were able to link it to the 12 days. If you are absent beyond a reasonable amount in the first 12 days of ninth grade, it is a very good indication that this person is going to be a failure in high school. They're going to all the factors that affect attendance. They are going to home, on factors that go on at home. But they also, this one, a very important element is I don't know, for lack of a better word, the marriage between the student and the school. How connected are they with the school? Doesn't matter where they're coming from or whatever, what is the identification that they have? They found that to be very important. The work of teachers, administrators, and counselors definitely, and the students. For example, I mean, we know of a young girl who was in the 8th grade. She was a model student. She couldn't see what in English. I know, she's crying. And the mother and the family, I mean, they want, but what are they going to do? You know, I don't know what the reason is behind that, but I suspect there are many other little fires going on. And eventually students say, yeah, what the heck, or whatever. And then the demoralization begins. Now, that's not to say that we have a pretty good district, pretty great students, but if we don't connect, if we don't make that connection with the structure, the curriculum, and the supervision, it's gonna be a tough task.
So what you have not seen is the hidden presentation that Dr. Bear had also prepared, which included an additional 12, 15 slides that talked about all of those warning signs and explaining how they fit in. And that
I was
was
not
one-
kidding, I made a copy of it so that I could
I
delete it
said,
here.
we're not doing that because we only have 90 minutes. So, but absolutely, and to your point about the connection issue, everyone here agrees, and we try to measure that using our panorama survey. That's one of the items we do try to measure, and when we saw that it was not where we wanted it to be, that became a focus across the district with relationships, establishing relationships. So the connectedness it's an important factor that we're trying to measure and improve.
I use one final thing, Dr. Hines, if I can bring up Dr. Hernandez. It's very interesting because Dr. Hernandez happened to be a very prominent heart surgeon here in Long Island. He was at St. Francis, now he's at Southside. One of the smart kid, right? But the family, when he was at home, they were watching TV with his brothers and sisters. It was the intervention of his father who said, for as much as I love you watching those shows, you've got to cut that out. So there was some acknowledgement on the part of the father, and he said, we are not going to longer watch this show because we've got to study. And it was a hard thing to deal with. Anyway, eventually this young man, went to Princeton, Harvard, became a heart surgeon, was here at St. Francis, he's in Southside. He talks about, from his real experience of what it takes. He went to Princeton, and what it meant to him was not having that connection, because, we understand what schools are, right? And how they work and what it means. But some of these kids who have been, coming from agricultural backgrounds, it's not that bad. It's just they have a different set of understanding of what a school is, and and the parents have to be involved in the school. Unfortunately, a lot of these parents are working very hard, so it's difficult.
Jessica?
Yeah, so thank you. This presentation was very thorough and well organized and inspiring and also reassuring in the view into the interventions and plan moving forward. So my question is perhaps a more specific version of a question that seems to have been asked in the abstract a few times. We see that the early indicator system is really critical to improving graduation rates moving forward. Is that in play at Weber now, that system, or is it being implemented at Weber? One thing we hear from the parent community all the time is this cry for consistency. When we talk about systems and systemization, this seems like
an area that is just so ripe for consistency so that parents, to Mr. Porter's point about parental engagement, really understand the ways their children are being looked at by the teams in place in their buildings over the course of their full secondary career.
So, certainly if Ms. Javelin were here, she would certainly speak to some of the progress she's made in terms of developing and fostering greater consistency within the middle school. As part of this district priority, we have a team, not just of high school folks, but high school, middle school, and elementary school folks that are working together to put this plan in place. And although today has been focused on the high school, we all, and if I recall, Dr. Vera alluded to this earlier, right? She's got the wonderful privilege at the end of the year of handing out diplomas and leading a graduating class, but we all recognize that that is through the work of our entire pre-K through 12 system. And, she gets the glory at the end, also the responsibility, but it's really a pre-K through 12. So that is a priority across the district. We are taking steps. We will continue to take steps within the buildings, across the buildings at the elementary level, and among the buildings when you're going from elementary to middle and middle to high school. We're well aware that all of that builds on, and some of the, what I feel is some of the most important work is taking place pre-K through 2 in terms of interventions and reading and literacy. That payoff is going to take a little while, but it's going to occur each and every year beyond that. So we absolutely understand the need for, and we're working towards that, both within and the buildings and across the 7 buildings.
Dr. Feeney, can I just extend just for a quick moment that I can speak to at Weber, there are bi-monthly child study teams where principal, counselors, social workers do get together, and then teachers are invited as needed. And also, like Dr. Feeney was just talking about, that pivotal articulation piece that takes place. So all of those things are happening, and that's not just a once and done type thing where, we are handing off, or elementary handing off to Weber, but then those students are looked at very closely as they get acclimated to Weber, and then once again from Weber to Schreiber. So those pieces are happening.
And is the data being used in the way it is being used at Schreiber to sort of put those, or surface those red flags that, may not necessarily come up in a 5-minute meeting about each kid, if that's what's happening?
And I think that might speak to what Dr. Feeney was just saying about looking to that. Yeah. Dr. Hunt?
Yeah, so I'm saying this in the most loving way. I think prior to 2019, there was a lack of systems in place, not only at Schreiber, but district-wide. And we have to fully acknowledge that moving forward. There was also, I think, a lack of using data to make decisions and focusing specifically on individual and collective data. We're now having those conversations now for the first time. And in some ways, people are thrilled about it, like most things, they've changed. Some people are not so thrilled about it because it's a new and different way of moving forward. The last thing I'll say too is that we have now, I think we're really at a great point. We have old eyes wisdom and new eyes wisdom, to go back to that saying. And with that, the new eyes wisdom is turning over rocks that haven't been turned over before. And I think, and again, I'm not blaming anybody, but in the past, we would turn it over and go, yeah, I'm gonna just leave that rock there for a little while. But with the plan in place, and as this very short presentation showed us, everything is pointing and leading toward the portrait of a graduate. And the fact that we have a plan, a systemic plan in place, we're moving in the right direction. I think today was evidence of all arrows pointing together for the first time in a long time, for the flagship of our school district, which is really exciting news. And so I think, George, what you were saying, the cultural change within the flagship is going to take time. And the mantra has been since the beginning of this year, it's all about relationships, because without relationships, things wither away. You have to feel connected to something outside of yourself. And I think we're moving in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you. This was fantastic. Our next meeting is Friday, May 19th, and we will be discussing the core extension program at Weber. And with that, I wish everyone a wonderful spring break. Thank you.
I know. I'm gonna see the conference center. Yeah.
All my